Britain is bleeding residents, and the newly released figures are a disaster. 693,000 people left the UK in less than a year, according to a report from National Statistics, a number large enough to wipe out the entire population of Glasgow City and still have enough left over to swallow a portion of Inverness on the map of Scotland. A country that once took centuries to build an image as a desirable place to live is now seeing approximately 13,300 people raise the white flag and retreat each week. And this isn't about tourists whose visas have expired or students returning home after a semester. These are long-term residents, British citizens, families who have been rooted here for generations. And more people are coming to the same conclusion. London, and even cities that were once magnets of opportunity, is no longer worth it. England was once the promised land where people came to start their lives, for opportunity, career, pace of life, and prosperity. But in 2026, many people will leave to start over, in places where they can afford rent without considering it a life project. It's not that they hate England, they just couldn't keep loving a country in a one-sided way, having to transfer money every month to prove their loyalty. In today's video, we'll dissect the British cities that are losing population in this way, not because they've become unattractive, but because they're becoming places suitable only for two types of people, the extremely wealthy and those willing to burn out. The rest, silently packed. For decades, London has been sold as a promise. Rise through merit, change your life through hard work. And it's true that the salary here is often better than elsewhere, with a median income of around £47,000 per year, a dream number for so many people. That includes me. However, London has a cold habit. It pays you a relatively stable income, then turns most of that income into an entry fee for you to continue living in the city itself. ONS data shows that the average private rent in London has risen to around £2,268 per month, the highest in the UK. That figure makes the mere act of moving to the capital to get a job enough to make rent the biggest expense in life, potentially consuming up to about 47% of income. This rate naturally varies by region and time, but the logic is very consistent. You're not knocked down by unemployment, you're strangled each month by the cost of living. When nearly half of your income disappears into rent, the rest of your life shrinks very quickly. Savings, plans for children, healthcare, decent meals, and even the idea of stability and a better life naturally become luxuries. This isn't just personal preference. Since 2007, wages have remained almost stagnant. While rent has increased faster than inflation, this is the biggest crack, as it turns housing from a basic need into an endurance competition. People still go to work, still pay taxes, still follow the rules, but life doesn't move forward. Worse, sometimes it even regresses. The feeling of doing everything right and still losing is the most likely to make people give up, because it's not a problem that can be solved with just a few money-saving tricks. London is also expensive in another sense. It's expensive in terms of effort. Every time the contract is renewed, every time the landlord raises the rent, every time you weigh the options between renting near work or accepting an extra hour of commuting, you have to reconfigure your life as if you were living temporarily. And temporary, if it lasts long enough, will become a kind of squatting or a broken social contract. London's biggest contradiction is this. Good jobs are concentrated here, and it's this very concentration that drives up house prices and rents, pushing out the people who keep the city running: nurses, teachers, caregivers, drivers, service workers. Those who don't appear on City of Opportunity posters are the backbone. When they can't survive here, the urban quality will weaken from within. To be fair, London still has real appeal. Top-notch education, a stable legal system, relatively political stability, and strong cultural and lifestyle attractions. London may be crowded and expensive, but its tradition, history, theaters, and museums create a lifestyle that cities like Dubai, with their cosmetically sleek towers, struggle to replicate. But the problem is that the entrance fee increases steadily and increasingly ruthlessly. At some point, many people don't leave because they hate London, but because they don't want to spend their entire lives paying an invisible tax just to be allowed to stay. London might still pay okay, but if it makes you realize that stability here is sometimes just the right to keep paying rent, then you can follow the channel to keep going calmly and factually. Since we're leaving London, we'll go to Manchester, where the question is no longer expensive, but when the machine runs out of money, how will the city function? Manchester was once considered by many to be a reasonable escape. There was still work, still culture, without paying the price of London. But in recent years, the city has begun to take on a different feel. You come for the opportunities, only to realize you're living in a silent negotiation between money and health. The ONS recorded the average private rent in Manchester at £1,330 per month in November 2025, a 3.9% increase compared to November 2024. This number isn't as staggering as London's, but it has a more ominous quality. It eats into expectations. Manchester was once a place where people believed they could still build a normal life, and as rents rose steadily, normal became something to calculate. But the high cost in Manchester doesn't stop at the lease agreement. It spills over into commute times, air quality, and mental state, things rarely factored into the cost of living, even though they determine whether you can live at all. A report published in November 2025 by the University of Manchester highlighted the growing link between poor health and productivity, stating that if the health gap between the North and the rest of the UK were closed, the economy could be unlocked for an additional £18.4 billion annually. In a sense, this is a story of air is more expensive than rent. You can pay for housing, but you pay with your health and energy, and that price doesn't show up on your bank statement. The operating mechanism is quite straightforward. Growth pulls people back. Housing and infrastructure can't keep up. Traffic is congested, time is drained, stress increases, health declines, and financial stability becomes more fragile. At a certain point, just a small push, a rent increase, an unexpected bill, or a prolonged illness is enough to throw the entire structure of life off balance. People don't necessarily leave because they're unemployed, but because they don't want to live in a state of constant recovery, even when they're working. In the eyes of the world, Manchester still has real appeal: universities, creativity, sports, new jobs, but it was that very attraction that heated up the market and accelerated the pace of life. So, if growth erodes healthy life expectancy, should we call that success or a hidden cost? Birmingham is often described as a declining city, but its true story is more problematic. This is the moment when an urban machine begins to falter due to its books. In September 2023, Birmingham City Council issued a Section 114 notice, a signal that the council could not balance its spending according to the law and had to tighten many expenditures. What people find frustrating isn't the financial terminology, but what they see right on the sidewalk. In March 2025, Birmingham declared a major incident due to a prolonged waste strike that left over 17,000 tons of garbage uncollected. In a city of over 1 million people, garbage isn't just garbage. It's flies, rodents, and the feeling that even the most basic hygiene standards are a matter of luck. So why has a major city declined to this extent? The answer lies in the no one wants to pay but still has to pay amounts. Council documents show that the risk of equal pay liability was previously underestimated, with the estimated liability potentially ranging from £650 million to £760 million, enough to deplete the financial buffer. Simultaneously, public analyzers cited cost overruns from the Oracle system implementation estimated at around £100 million. For the people. This isn't an accounting matter, it's a question of where tax money goes and who has to live with the consequences when money is scarce. As budgets shrink, councils are forced to cut things that few people notice until they disappear: road maintenance, libraries, youth services, social support. Then the spiral began. Declining services led to businesses and skilled workers leaving, the tax base weakened, and budget pressures intensified. Does a city run on investment or on budget magic? And when the council has to choose between legal obligations and basic services, who will pay the price? For those living in Liverpool, the question always arises, are the city's residents benefiting from its revival? You can walk across the riverbank, see the new projects, hear the music, see the flow of tourists, and think everything is fine. But living somewhere is not the same as visiting somewhere. Life is about how much you get paid, how long your employment contract lasts, and the feeling that the local government is playing by the same rules as the people. That feeling was eroded as trust was drawn into the cycle of investigation and the courtroom. In 2025, major news outlets reported that former Mayor Joe Anderson and several others were charged in a case related to alleged bribery and misconduct in the awarding of Liverpool City Council contracts between 2010 and 2020. There's no need to draw conclusions on behalf of the court here. Just admit one thing: when a city is touted as reborn, people will take a closer look at who signed, who benefited, and why they still have to struggle. Liverpool's sore point, if you had to choose a single axis, isn't rent. That's the income structure. A regional profile compiled by the Work Foundation states that workers in the Liverpool City region have an average weekly wage of approximately £571, which is £59 less than the England average. And about 18.8% of workers are in severely insecure work. These numbers are not meant to create tragedy. They only explain why a city with a strong brand football, heritage, culture can still feel tiring, because a brand often brings with it unstable services, seasons, and jobs where you have to work harder to maintain the same standard of living. In Liverpool, people can be proud, even very proud, but pride doesn't pay the bills. When the city transforms itself into a stage, the question becomes pressing. Are the audience tourists or residents? And how long can a community live on reputation if income isn't enough to create a normal life, a little savings, a short vacation, a medical reserve, or simply the feeling of not being left behind? Leeds has long carried an uncomfortable paradox. It is a major economic center, but is notorious for lacking a proper mass transit system. And when a city lacks a strong transportation network, inequality doesn't need to be emblazoned across the headlines of sensational articles. It just needs to lie dormant in the bus schedule. People near the center have an opportunity. Those living far from the center pay with time, with job opportunities that shrink with distance, and with their energy at the end of the day. By 2024, that frustration was great enough for West Yorkshire to announce plans to bring the bus system back under public control. After years of complaints about poor and unreliable service, Transport Focus was quoted by The Guardian as an indicator that the bus experience in West Yorkshire is among the worst in England. The larger backbone, the £2.5 billion tram/mass transit project, has been pushed further back. In late 2025, both The Guardian and the Financial Times reported that the plan had been delayed. With the completion date pushed back to the late 2030s after a review, the project was still confirmed as not cancelled. But not cancelled is different from soon available. For the people. This is a type of delay that erodes trust. The city is constantly promised better connectivity, but current life remains fragmented. And it is precisely in that gap that reconstruction easily becomes something that looks good rather than something that keeps people around. New apartments, brightly lit retail areas, perfect renderings. It could all be true, but if the buses are still late, if the commute is still tiring, if time for children is still consumed by traffic, people will feel diminished in a growing city. Who is Leeds rebuilding for? And if progress means ordinary people have to live further, travel longer, and be more tired, is that progress? Or a polite way of pushing them out of the picture? Brighton and Hove always knows how to sell a feeling of life. The sea, the wind, live music, and narrow streets beautiful enough to make people believe that life can slow down. But sometimes, that very lifestyle becomes what draws people out of the city. It's not that they've stopped loving Brighton, but that they're starting to realize they're living as backstage crew for someone else's vacation. Local authorities stated this very bluntly in very administrative language. Short-term rentals reduce long-term housing options, contribute to housing pressure, and are even linked to the risk of homelessness. They also put pressure on parking and disrupt residential neighborhoods. This is the kind of sentence that is often overlooked, but if you read it carefully, it's like an admission. The housing market isn't just getting more expensive, but is being repurposed. By 2025, the debate about Airbnb/short-lets will no longer be about being annoyed by noisy guests. Brighton and Hove Council is publicly considering ways to license, register, and tighten regulations on short-lets, even considering lobbying the government for a more easily controlled legal framework. When a city has to talk about registering and licensing something that was once considered free enterprise, it means the level of tension has reached the community structure, another pressing issue related to the environment and bills. In Sussex, the issue of wastewater is no longer a distant topic. In 2025, data and investigations showed that very few cases were prosecuted for concealing illegal dumping. The government simultaneously announced stronger measures, including the possibility of imprisonment for obstructing investigations. The issue isn't about condemning a specific company in a video. The problem is a very real sense of injustice. Why should people have to pay increasingly heavy bills, while the quality of the rivers and sea which make Brighton what it is has become a matter of investigation? Brighton thus became a brutal test, a city that could be both a home for its residents and a product for the tourism market, without sacrificing either. And who will stay to run the hospitals, schools, and restaurants if the people who work there can no longer afford housing? Oxford is a place where people believe in reason. But sometimes, it's math itself that makes people the most discouraged. If income grows slowly while housing grows rapidly, there will inevitably come a point where working hard is no longer enough to make ends meet. In recent years, local authorities have also not shied away from this issue. A data summary on housing affordability in Oxfordshire states that the county-wide affordability ratio is approximately 10.31, with Oxford specifically cited as the highest in the county at a ratio of approximately 11.71. This is the kind of data that can silence people. It's no longer about arguing expensive or cheap, but shows the systemic gap between house prices and income. What's remarkable is that Oxford isn't lacking in reasonable needs: universities, hospitals, knowledge-based jobs, and a large number of people coming to study and work. But the housing supply is tightly constrained by land limitations, zoning, infrastructure, and conservation precious things that sound noble and are sometimes necessary. Then the rental market was driven by a group capable of paying higher than the normal rate, pushing essential workers out of their affordable living radius. Oxford City Council even has an advice page for key workers, explicitly stating that the council does not have a dedicated housing program for key workers like teachers or nurses. Small words, but big consequences. Who will run the city if the operators have nowhere to live? Oxford became the clearest example of a case where the process was correct, but the outcome was wrong. That's right, because everyone has their reasons. Conservation, quality of life, the environment, the budget. Because ultimately, a segment of the population is excluded from the city through the price mechanism smoothly, legally, and without a single direct rejection. Should knowledge create a city where essential workers cannot belong, and when everything is valid but creates an unlivable society, is the problem with the individual or with the model? Perhaps the scariest thing isn't that Britain is about to collapse in a disaster movie kind of way, but it's changing in a quieter way. Ordinary people are being pushed out of what was once called the center of opportunity, Ultimately, what's leaving first? The population, or the belief that playing by the rules will lead to a decent life? And if a country accepts that healthy life expectancy, the ability to raise children, or the right to live near one's workplace become regional privileges, what remains of the social contract? Which city do you think is on this path the fastest, and what small signs made you realize? Is it rent money, waiting time for a permit, bus routes being cut, or familiar shops closing one by one? If this video makes you feel like you have more to say, leave a comment about the city you live in and the most ordinary detail you see changing. If you want me to do a follow-up delving deeper into the data, the story, and the hidden corners, please like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss out. Please note, this content is intended for social analysis based on publicly available sources and cited data, which may change over time and depending on the method of measurement. This is not financial, legal, or immigration advice, and is not intended to assign blame or draw conclusions on behalf of law enforcement or the courts.